Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, as a Patreon request from VTH, I'm talking about the 2021 album from DJ Sabrina, the Teenage DJ, the Makin Magick 2 album. Happy Halloween! Complete coincidence. This request happened to line up well enough, like tangentially topic-wise and timing-wise for this occasion. But for today's festivities, we're going to dip into the world of witches, wizards, and sorcery and talk about the well-acclaimed UK producer DJ Sabrina, the Teenage DJ. I think DJ Sabrina is technically a duo, helmed by a woman producer with some assistance from her brother, although they are still working anonymously with no sources to confirm their identity. I've seen them referred to as both them and her, and I've read an interview with DJ Sabrina where she is answering questions as a singular person, so up to you what pronouns you want to use, I suppose. Anyway, this is far from my first time covering DJ Sabrina. I've covered her 4 times in the past. I've done full videos on the albums Charmed and Destiny, as well as some stuff I missed segments on the albums Bewitched and Hex. Links to all of those in the description. DJ Sabrina can sometimes be like a tricky act to review, since the entire massive back catalog mostly sticks to like one particular recognizable formula and sound, mostly centered around plunderphonic house and future funk bangers that maybe start out simple and straightforward but keep layering on sounds and building up to intense heights and epic climaxes, and with all of it trying to evoke some old, like, I guess late 90s, early 2000s nostalgia for the era of Disney Channel sitcoms. And any given Sabrina album will just throw absolute shit tons of material in this framework at you over the course of massive sprawling experiences that always run on for an hour and a half at the bare minimum, and often stretching on for over 2 hours or even 3 or 4 hours in specific one-off cases. The length and general sameness of Sabrina records was always a difficult hurdle for me to get over, especially given my starting point to get into her was 2020's Charmed, the 3-hour album that first really blew her work up and got the attention of a wider audience. And I felt like I was going nuts when I saw several of my reviewing colleagues look at the length and reassure everyone that no, all of it was perfectly justified to them and there was not a single skip for them. And when I make a 2-hour album, I'm the one being overindulgent. That's a false equivalency. Anyway, while I could admit that Charmed had some absolutely incredible high points, which at this point have cemented themselves as, like, legit some of the best future funk bangers of all time, maybe, I couldn't personally agree that the massive length felt justified to me. I loved about a third of it, and the rest was merely decent to pretty good for me at the time. I suspect the fact that people were comparing it to The Avalanches may not have done it any favors as well, since even if it is extremely easy to see that they were a direct influence, as someone who is like just a super die-hard fan of The Avalanches, all of their albums make for a bar so high as to be near impossible to clear for me. Anyway, when Charmed was followed up a year later by not 1, but 2 albums released on the same day, the Makin Magick 2 album and The Other Realm, both of which were roughly 2 hours long. At the time, I opted to just skip them altogether out of feeling like that was going to be too much of a commitment to be worth it. Though, I suppose things did get a little more interesting when following Sabrina albums turned out to prove the lengths didn't actually correlate with the quality level. I could appreciate the comparative approachability of Bewitched, but I ended up finding it a fair bit less interesting than Charmed. And then after that we got Destiny, an even more ridiculously overstuffed 4-hour album that people were still bigging up as much as all the others, and somehow that was the one that really clicked with me all the way and lived up to all the hype. The 3-hour album felt like way too much for me, but the 4-hour one felt justified with almost no skips and pulled me in way more consistently. I ended up keeping the entire album front to back, and it ended up notching a spot on my year-end list for 2023, taking the spot directly above the Orbital album released in the same year, which I still cannot believe that actually happened. Although when I first uploaded my review of Destiny, there was also one commenter who told me that I was really missing out by having skipped over the Makin Magick 2 album. album. That this was Sabrina's real best work, going underappreciated, and that if I listened to it, it was going to be like all my favorite parts of Destiny even further turned up and that kind of thing. Now, initially I took this comment with a grain of salt. I thought, well, how much is another DJ Sabrina album really going to be able to blow me away if they're all kind of exactly the same anyway? Though the commenter didn't stop there. I think one day I saw them tag me on Twitter attempting to start up one of those campaigns like what happens with Fantano sometimes, in which I would get tagged every day to check out the Makin Magick 2 album. Very second I saw that, I immediately shut that shit down, and told them I would make sure to check it out on my own time later. Even bought the album on Bandcamp. Just for the record, don't be a dick, yo. One person spamming the same request over and over is a good way to irritate me and in no way makes me want to check out an album more. So of course that same commenter decided to take the one option that would absolutely guarantee I covered the album in depth, to send it in for this Patreon request. So they have been waiting for a long time, but now the time has finally come for me to find out what exactly I have been missing with the Making Magick 2 album. Now, I was thinking that I might want to get a little more context while researching this one, so I thought I should probably listen to The Other Realm, hear this album's companion piece, but I also thought I should hear what this album is acting as a sequel to, and listen to the Making Magick 1 album. It's just called Making Magick. And then I noticed there were only 3 other albums in the Sabrina catalog outside of that, which I hadn't heard yet, and all of them were only an hour and a half, so before I knew it, I was just re-listening to the entire DJ Sabrina discography to make absolutely sure that there wasn't any other mind-blowing experiences I was missing out on. And I decided, fuck it, let's just do a full and brief segment. Even if the entire Sabrina catalog mostly sticks to one particular sound and formula, there is more to say there that could be interesting, so what the hell, let's just talk about all of it. So here's my quick thoughts on the full album discography so far. Just the main albums, no like alternate versions of those albums or teaser EPs or DJ mixes or anything like that. I'm not that crazy. Okay, Sabrina's well-acclaimed debut album from 2017 here sets down a familiar template for the formulas that would become commonplace through the whole catalog. The same light and fluffy Disney Channel pop vibes and sample-based house bangers over a sprawling 2-hour, 21-track experience. Although this album has a very different feel from any of the Sabrina records that would follow. It's way more like lo-fi feeling, with perhaps some of those old-school vaporwave influences from the surrounding future funk scene still present. And it's also a lot more heavy on the synths and drum machines rather than the samples, and not nearly as dense in its sound design compared to the usual Sabrina fare. Much more traditional house than plunderphonic or future funk. Which honestly makes it a pretty interesting listen in its own unique way that I wasn't expecting as someone who was introduced to her sound 3 years later after it got a lot more polished. I wouldn't necessarily call this like a home run, but it's pretty solid and a promising start for sure. This album, meanwhile, moves further into the sample-heavy stuff, getting the usual Sabrina sound further nailed down with more tracks that have, like, the denser build-ups you tend to expect out of her productions. Also, even though this may or may not be, like, the least popular record in her catalog, I was really surprised by how much I ended up getting into it. I felt like the sound got a decent bit more varied with, you know, samples from pop and soul and gospel and the like, both bangers and ballads with very little redundancy in the track listing. And the whole thing's only an hour and a half. I think it might be Sabrina's shortest studio album, although don't quote me on that, I haven't double checked. Maybe takes a few tracks to really get going, the very beginning's a little weak, but once I had Feel the Pain 2, I'm pretty hooked for the remainder of it. Honestly, this is exactly the experience I hoped I was going to get back when Bewitched came out, a record that could be able to more effectively act as a starting point for a potential new fan to ease themselves into the sound, that could demonstrate her core appeal without having to sit through some massive 3-hour experience, so yeah, despite having possibly the worst of her album covers, this was actually one of my biggest favorites in her catalog. Okay, this was probably the point at which the Sabrina formula got completely nailed down and the sound you know would be stuck to for all subsequent records, all the Disney Channel sitcom vibes everywhere. Alas, in the grander scheme of her catalog, I don't feel like this is among the most memorable. The formula set down by this record's been repeated and improved upon many times over, and later records do similar ideas even better. Though, you know, it's got its moments, like Quickly Things Can Change, Night Drive Part 1, Oh Baby, L Low, among others. It's pretty good, but not great. Similar feelings on this one as the last one, though unlike that album, which I feel was more middle-loaded than anything, my favorite parts of this one were like around the beginning and the very end. Especially the last 3 tracks, which were pretty attention-grabbing. Tracks could hit on some occasional spacey vibes, like the especially wild, video gamey title track, or hit some big emotional climaxes like the closer What Else Should I Believe, and also the track I Reach Out is a major standout for similar reasons. There's also a decent amount of tracks here that feel more fillerish to me in the middle, and one track, Ambition, that went for like a 80s R&B inspired thing that just did not work for me at all. But yeah, I guess that adds up to about an equally strong listen to Spellbound. Possibly a tiny bit better, but not by much if that. And here's of course the point at which I, and I presume most other people, were originally first made aware of her work. Kinda already went through what my thoughts were like when it first came out in this video's intro, but re-listening to the full 3 hours again for the first time in years in the lead up to this video, I felt like much of the rest of the album started clicking with me a decent bit more than it used to. Not all of it, mind you. There's still plenty of cuts that either fall in the background or throw me off for various reasons, and the track A might be Sabrina's worst track ever for me. But the whole thing was much more consistently engaging than I remembered. I never would have realized before how self-referential this album was to the greater Sabrina back catalog. Tracks like Still Cool and one of my old favorites, Feel the Pain 1, are both new versions of tracks originally from Witchcraft. One of these tracks references You Might Be Surprised to Find Yourself Singing It Right Now from Spellbound. I forget which one exactly. In more ways than one, this really felt like the big epic culmination of everything the previous albums were leading up to, and I've started to come around to seeing more of what my colleagues saw in it at the time. So yeah, I think at this point I'm comfortable calling it the second best DJ Sabrina album. Alright, next was the album which is the main subject of this video, so we will get to that in a bit. But released on the exact same day as that one was this near equally long companion album. This album's intro and outro go for like this weird, spacey, dark ambient thing that seemed to promise like a darker experience than the usual fare. Although while most of the rest of the album doesn't really commit to that and ends up sticking back to more the usual dance pop fare, I suppose there is a loose theme of focusing on even more retro dance formulas with throwbacks to synthwave, 80s electro, early 90s hip house, and the like, which ironically ends up making this album feel a lot more like a natural follow-up to Makin Magick than the Makin Magick 2 album actually did. Now, this admittedly is not one of the stronger efforts in the Sabrina catalog. I zone out through at least half of it, but again, it's got its moments. Here's a bunch of my favorite cuts, and I do at least respect the attempt to try something different. While the theme isn't present for the full album, the darker edges promised in the beginning stretch are still like just barely around enough to give the album its own feel separate from other Sabrina albums, so I guess I'll take that. Alright, I've already reviewed this one, though coming back to it after discovering that Sabrina had 3 other albums before this which were also only an hour and a half, resulting in this losing the novelty of being comparatively short and digestible by her standards, I now feel that this is actually one of the least essential efforts in her catalog. It's all the same vibe you'd expect, done as well as you'd expect, but there were really only like 2 really big standouts for me in You Never Know and Beautiful All Alone, and the rest was mostly on the background music-y side and wasn't anything I hadn't heard from her done better, so yeah. But this is still what I feel to be Sabrina's true masterpiece, bringing together everything that worked about the previous albums and taking every idea to the next level. Pretty much stand by everything I've already said about it in my video. I do think Charm's highest points are still slightly higher, but this album just has everything. Cool one-off genre pivots into electro, IDM, jazz, R&B, psychedelic pop, rock, and hip-hop, and more. It has some of the biggest emotional heavy hitters and some of the catchiest hooks in the Sabrina catalog. The transitions between tracks feel even more seamless sometimes. And it's legit impressive that this album managed to keep me consistently invested over 4 entire hours, with maybe only like 5 or 6 tracks out of 41 total that feel fillerish to me, and even those are not outright skips either. The fact that it still held up to me as my easy favorite of these, even when I listened to it in close proximity to all the other DJ Sabrina albums, is a real testament to the quality on display here. Alright, this one is also a little better than I remembered coming back to it. Obviously not nearly on Charmed or Destiny level, but at least has some decent variety to it, which is one of the key elements to getting a Sabrina album to stick in my mind better. Again, pretty much stand by most of the specific feelings that I outlined in my review. The main thing I remember this album for is one big standout right at the beginning. This station rules the nation! Which made like that big one-off drum and bass swerve that really stuck out to me from the usual formulas. And while the rest of the album has its ups and downs, it has a particularly strong beginning and end. All of these tracks are standouts of note, so yeah, it's one of the better entrants in her discography. And finally, the most recent project as of recording this video. I did hear this one around the time it came out, just this past December, although I didn't review it. And that's because there's not really anything to say about it. Having now heard the entire Sabrina album back catalog, I think I can definitively call this her weakest album yet. It's easily the blandest and most background music-y listen out of all of these. All the exact same standard Sabrina formulas you'd expect with no twists, and no tracks that stick out as being among the best. The hooks range from non-existent to mildly irritating. There's no interesting genre swerves. It's all mildly pleasant, but forgettable filler that sounds like other stuff Sabrina's already done much better before. Okay, I do like the track The Places Our Regrets. That's the best one here. That's got some nice melancholic guitar riffs there, but that's about all I got, honestly. It's not difficult to sit through or anything. It's just okay, but unless you're a diehard or completionist, this one's safe to skip. So there you go, that's my feelings on the greater DJ Sabrina catalog. It's interesting how when you listen to enough Sabrina, you do just kinda stop caring about the length of some of these projects. You get used to the pacing, and the whole never-ending DJ set concept the project has adhered to since the beginning starts to settle with you. Even if most of these albums are the kind of stuff that I would recommend, you know, like having something else to work on while you listen, and some projects definitely hit much better than others. You can't really lose yourself in all of it, and all of the albums have their standout moments, even if it's only a couple of tracks in some cases. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's finally talk about the Makin Magick 2 album, the 2021 album that was actually requested to be covered in this video. How does that stack up? Well, it's one of the better Sabrina albums, for sure. I do not agree with the requester about it being like the real best moment of the entire Sabrina catalog. This is not in the same tier as Destiny or Charmed. I seem to recall the requester really highlighting this album's sonic variety as a plus for them, and while it is technically one of the more varied Sabrina albums, I don't believe this actually matches either of the two big albums in that department. But I will admit this is one of the higher tier efforts from Sabrina. Most of it sticks to the exact sound you'd expect, but where other Sabrina albums might only have like a handful of standouts, at least half to maybe even 2/3 of this album is able to hit enough for me to qualify as standouts. The hit-to-miss ratio here is better than most Sabrina albums. And I didn't feel the 2.5-hour length as much as I might have expected either. Obviously, not to say I didn't feel the length at all, or that it was like all killer no filler. There was definitely some filler. But unlike other lower tier Sabrina albums, there were never like long stretches of filler all gathered together in the same place. There would almost always be like a standout around the corner after nearly any given weaker track, which resulted in my feeling the length on this less than I felt the length on, say, The Other Realm, despite that album being 40 minutes shorter. So yeah, let's talk about individual tracks on this thing. Only got 22 to go through. So, like many other Sabrina albums, the track listing starts on something of a slower note. The album opening with the track Spirit follows in the same footsteps of Charmed starting with Next to Me and Destiny starting off with Honey. Not necessarily any of these albums' biggest home runs, but I suppose of those three, Spirit is probably the highest ranked standout in the context of its host album. All the sentimental vocal melodies stacking up and layering over each other still managed to nail down a pretty solid hook that did grow on me the more times I sat with it. And then the following track, Be Ready, takes a similar tune and reconfigures it over a much more propulsive house arrangement that has all these, like, fluttery string melodies, which is also quite fun. One particular strength I feel this album has in comparison to other Sabrina albums is this is among the best flowing. There is like a continuous stream of consciousness feel to the album, and many of these tracks seem to be like iterations and or direct evolutions of ideas carried on by their preceding track. Especially in the very beginning stretch of the album. Like, the track Don't Miss That Flight is in the same key as the first two tracks, and even kind of returns to the slower pace of the opener for, like, a quick little sample-based pop tune, which is just 3 minutes. Technically the kind of thing one could, like, borderline mark as an interlude, but still stands on its own well enough to hit in its own separate way from the track it's designed to segue into. Airplane song Welcome Home. Now, this track in particular, the person who requested this video, like, really hyped up as the big standout from this album, and I have to say, yeah, I agree. I completely agree with the requester's hype of this track. Airplane Song is the best track on the album. The very second I heard it come on for the first time and got treated to all these massively grand and sweeping, like, orchestral samples cut out of, I guess, Disney movie-sounding soundtrack pieces that feel like they're meant to underscore, like, the final victory scenes or, like, romantic wedding scenes between the prince and princess or something. Second that came on, I was immediately just like, holy shit! Even if it makes perfect sense tone-wise for a track like this to show up on a Sabrina album, I just was not at all expecting something with this kind of, like, John Williams scale orchestral bombast. And the way those samples work up against the thicker house beats underneath and build up to such towering heights complete with another sax solo again. This is both a twist on the Sabrina formula that sounds absolutely nothing like any other Sabrina track, but also feels like it's trying to top some of the very biggest emotional heights of the entire catalog. With enough repeat listens, I think I'm comfortable saying Airplane Song might be like in my top 5 favorite Sabrina tracks at this point. Maybe like number 4 behind End of an Era, I Want You to Know, and For Now and Forever. So yeah, that was amazing. Perhaps, unfortunately, nothing else in the track listing provides a left hook on quite that level. But that's not to say the album loses any momentum either. In fact, while the following track, Lose Myself, returns to the standard Sabrina sound at 2000's Poppin' House, minus any of the orchestral stuff, it also builds a new tune out of, like, the exact same beat, tempo, and chord progression, and the two tracks fit so seamlessly it feels like they were part 1 and 2 of the same whole, with Airplane Song as a build-up and Lose Myself as the payoff and culmination. For a segue to be that smooth, especially given this is all mostly sample-based and cut together out of otherwise unrelated tracks, is pretty genius. Shit like this is why I love Plunderphonic records. And if you wanted the tempo to be turned back up, we then get into Each Time, which stomps along back to the standard house pace and has all these semi-shouty male vocal harmonies for the hook, which are quite fun. This early stretch of the album and those first 5 or 6 tracks is probably my favorite part of the whole album. After that point, the experience does definitely have all its ups and downs, trading between more amazing heights as well as tracks which are just kind of there and don't stand out among the usual Sabrina, like, flashy emotional house mixes. Like, I don't have nearly as strong feelings about the next 3 tracks. Paradise certainly has a sound to it that isn't shared by any other track. It's mostly focused around these very muted and almost whispery, high-pitched male vocals going over a spare low-key synth instrumental. I guess it's mildly catchy, but maybe got a little grating on some listens. Wheels in Motion also has a memorable enough hook, which sometimes I think is fun and other times can be just kind of annoying, and either way doesn't really have much else beyond the hook to differentiate from other similar tracks. Especially the half-shouty vocals, which are similar to the vocals on Each Time earlier on the album. And in between those 2 tracks, you got I Guess You'll Find Out Even If It Ends, which I remember technically being a favorite on my very first listen on this album, and I have no recollection of why exactly I marked it as such, since I can't even, like, really remember the tune to this one, let alone pin down, like, a specific sound to it that you wouldn't get out of any other Sabrina track. I mean, it's nice, but it is definitely not a standout. So that 3-track run is a bit of a comparative lull. But thankfully it's followed up by a 3-track run of much bigger standouts. Really 4. Although one of those is That's All I Got So Far, which is kind of more of like a low-key interlude, not really a major track in its own right. Right before that track, you get I'm Still High, which, even if the female vocal hooks and epic house beats on this one don't sound like they'd be that different from most Sabrina tracks on paper, there's just like a big airy spaciousness to this one not shared by any other tracks here, and like a spirit-lifting quality to it that just like really stands out from the track listing. I think some of the like orchestral samples come back a little for this one too, albeit obviously nowhere near as bombastic as Airplane Song. Kind of more subtle in their approach, but similarly really heightening the emotional stakes. That's a track that like really makes me feel like I'm flying up in the clouds or something. But after the aforementioned interlude, we got the album's centerpiece track, Being Alone. This track runs on for just under 12 minutes and is probably my second favorite track on the album behind Airplane Song. It switches over to like a even faster paced techno-adjacent kind of beat, going up next to all these exceptionally pretty guitar and piano arrangements, with all these melancholic pop vocal samples lamenting loneliness. There's acid breakdowns, there's big epic chorus sections, there's quiet moments, there's loud moments, subtle build-ups into super satisfying payoffs. This is exactly the kind of mix that I would come to a DJ Sabrina album specifically wanting to get. So yeah, that is excellent. And it also culminates into Can't Help Myself Tonight, another more straightforward house cut that has all these warmer and spacier pads and subtle strings surrounding the whole mix, and all these emotional little piano riffs that have maybe a little bit of Robert Miles energy to them, I guess. There's not really a strong catchy hook to the track, but the emotional weight and exceptional prettiness behind this mix is more than able to make up for that and highlight it as a strong standout anyway. Alright, now the last hour of the album beyond this point doesn't reach quite as many big heights as the first hour and a half, and there is a subtle sense of my attention deflating over time. But there's still plenty of cool stuff beyond this point. Love Is the Purest Thing There Is initially grabbed my attention with its mix that started incorporating some kind of like sitar-like sounds, so that was cool. Although it doesn't fully commit to that flavor and kind of just meanders into unrelated territory without a stronger hook, so yeah. I'll Never Stop, meanwhile, is kind of the opposite of that. Absolutely nothing new to that track sonically, aside from maybe having one of the marginally more synth-centric backdrops, but it does have one of the better hooks in this stretch of the album with its airy, high-pitched female vocal snippets. Let's stay in tonight. The next actual standout for me, I think, is Feeling Lonely, although this is kind of like a weirder interstitial kind of moment for the album. The hook to this one sounds like a quarter-second snippet of someone talking covered in so much echo and reverb it just sounds like some weirdly enveloping tuneless sound effect, but that makes it stand out all the more, and the disco groove underneath it still goes quite hard. And the following track, Miss Me, feels like it might be taking the slightest possible hint of country influence in the general tone of vocal delivery of that chopped up core sample, as well as the choice in, like, I guess, acoustic guitars and maybe even little bits of steel guitar in the background. Also, as far as hooks go, it's probably the last one strong enough to get lodged in my head easily. Next there's Satisfy, which I guess goes for another marginally slower R&B influence mix that I guess has some decent evolution to it, but doesn't really stand out to me that much. And anyway, if it's evolution I want, there's two tracks immediately after that which quite handily top it in that department and go for like a much greater scale. You got the album's longest track, One Day, stretching on over 13 minutes. And while the Go Dancing hook on that track is not among the strongest, it does make full use of its sprawl with both subtler and lower key stretches and thumping emotional house climaxes in typical Sabrina style. And that finally leads to the near 10-minute Princess, which in my opinion really should have just been the album's closer, since that feels like a similarly epic culmination of what One Day started with a slower tempo but a better hook. Keep on pushing harder. That makes better use of its comparatively more straightforward build-ups and epic payoffs, with like kind of a relatively final sounding chord progression, I guess. It would have felt like a really satisfying and fitting way for the album to close out. Although there's still two more tracks after that, in Back to Back and Music. And while they're both fine house cuts in the usual style with solid enough hooks, tacking these on at the end is a bit of an anticlimax way to finish, I'm gonna be honest. Music in particular feels like such an arbitrarily selected closer, like the album was like, well, I'm out of ideas, so it's over now. And had me like, wait, that's it? It's just gonna end like that? Okay. If this album were a TV show, that'd be like ending on a filler episode, not like an emotional resolution or even like a to-be-continued cliffhanger, just some status quo subplot that has nothing to do with anything. If this track were in any other spot on the album, I'd be fine with it, but it does really make the end feel like it just kind of comes out of nowhere in a slightly unearned spot. I mean, even Back to Back I think might have worked better as like a quick epilogue or something, even if, again, I still feel like it really should have just stopped at Princess, but whatever, it's not the end of the world or anything like that. The closer is the arbitrary pick I went with my least favorite on the album, but it was close between that and cuts like Wheels in Motion. I guess you'll find out even if it ends, Satisfy, briefly considered Paradise. I had a few options there between tracks I don't have as strong feelings on, I guess. So yeah, I guess that's everything on the Makin Magick 2 album. It's definitely a prototypical DJ Sabrina the Teenage DJ album, with everything I would typically expect out of the experience. The usual stream of consciousness approach to structuring does make for an occasionally messy listen, as many other Sabrina albums do. And while the album isn't completely lacking in variety, there are other Sabrina albums that are able to do better in that department. But I do have to give it credit, this album definitely has more standout tracks by quantity than most Sabrina albums, and the highest points here are in fact some of the very best Sabrina tracks ever. The album is easily worth it for hosting such tracks as Airplane Song, Lose Myself, I'm Still High, and Being Alone. And there's definitely more tracks I do really enjoy here than tracks I'm ambivalent on, which is not something I can say about all Sabrina albums. I want to say in the grander scheme of her catalog, this would probably be my 4th favorite. Obviously Destiny and Charmed are at the top, and I think I slightly prefer Witchcraft over this as well, since there's like a greater percentage of the overall running time, which I can mark as notable standouts. But this album has more standouts than that album by quantity of tracks again, so it is very close. I guess my ranking of all the Sabrina albums looks like this right now, though do not hold me to that too strongly. Some of these albums I've only listened to like maybe once. But yeah, while the Makin Magick 2 album is far from a stone cold masterwork for me, it is a very good album. And I am glad I spent as much time with it as I did. I think I can see myself at least keeping a bunch of parts of it around. And I'm feeling like a strong 7.5 to a light 7.7 out of 10 on it. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.
Keep